Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans. I'm your host, Matthew DeSantis, and this is the Win Place Show, a podcast devoted to all aspects of horse racing and handicapping that is proudly part of the Amalfi Media Network. Now, today we have a very special episode. We're not doing our weekly race recaps or our weekly race news or our weekly race previews. We're doing a special end of the year top 10 races of 2021. I love doing top 10 lists at the end of the year. It's always a lot of fun to go back and look at what stood out in a really amazing year in horse racing that saw some very high highs and sadly some very low lows. But we're going to talk about the highs today on this episode. Now, before we get to that, just a quick reminder for all of you listening to make sure to follow, download, rate, review, and share the Win Place Show on the podcast platform of your choice, as well as subscribe to the Win Place Show YouTube channel. And we're having this on YouTube. We're having this as a podcast. And you can also go to amalfimedia.com to read the blog that corresponds with this. So you can read some of my thoughts. We have all the videos embedded in that blog of the top 10 races. So it's a lot of fun. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can look in the comments below and in the description below the video, and you will see the links to all of the races that we talk about today. So it's going to be a lot of fun to do that. And like I said, make sure to head over to amalfimedia.com to get all of the great horse racing content you need to get ready for the run for the Triple Crown in 2022. Finally, make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace, and that's where you can tag me and tweet at me and let me know what you think of this list. If you think it's hogwash, if you think there are some omissions, if you agree with a lot of my choices, let me know. I always enjoy hearing from fellow horse racing enthusiasts. So with that being said, let's dive into the top 10 list. And before we do, I just want to kind of, preface everything I'm about to say by saying that I really combined a lot of factors when putting together this list. I looked at the importance of the race. I looked at how thrilling the race was, the impact that the outcome of the race had on horse racing, and the potential longevity that the race may have with the viewers long after 2021 is over. And so those are all really subjective things, and this is obviously a very subjective list. There's no definitive top 10. This is the only 10 horse races that matter sort of a list, but this is a fun exercise to go to, and I think I got a lot of really great ones on here. All these races are great. Whether you think they're in the top 10, that's, again, a subject for debate. One thing that I will just say right at the get-go, because after I put this list together, and I whittled it down from about 25 races down to about 15 and then down to about 10. And one of the horses that does not appear on this list anywhere is the likely Eclipse Award-winning horse of the year, Knicks Go. And you might immediately say, well, Matthew, how can you have any top 10 list without Knicks Go? Knicks Go's going to win the Eclipse for the horse of the year. No doubt about it. I would cast a vote if I had one. Nobody's giving me a vote. But the reason I don't have Knicks Go is because when I went back and looked at all of Knicks Go's races, he has this incredible front-running style, and there's usually not a lot of intrigue in the race. He's that good. If anything, is it a compliment to Knicks Go that none of his races really register as instant classics? For him, it really is the totality of his races that are so impressive rather than any one single performance. And so I just wanted to shout out Knicks Go at the beginning and say, I recognize he ran in a lot of wonderful races and put in some tremendous performances, obviously peaking at the Breeders' Cup Classic this November at Del Mar, but I just didn't have any of his races in the top 10 because, again, a lot of those races, when you go back and watch them, well, Knicks Go just kind of wins easy and, wins going away and shows a lot of class doing it. And it's impressive, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of drama unfolding. The other horse that is not prominently mentioned on this list is Medina Spirit. And I think that's partially, it just was difficult for me to put Medina Spirit on this list. Obviously, with the recent passing of Medina Spirit, that was very difficult, I think, for all of us in the horse racing community. And while His Kentucky Derby victory is still shrouded in controversy. I think that's kind of why ultimately I left that race and as well as some of his other races off the list. I just didn't feel like it was the right time to say there was a top 10 list for Medina Spirit, knowing that he's no longer with us. That was a tough decision, but one that I decided to go with. So with that throat clearing out of the way, let's dive into the top 10 races. And coming in at number 10, and number 10 is always a spot, I think, for sentimental favorites. And this was a sentimental favorite of mine. It's the John Henry Turf Championship at Santa Anita back in October. And this was a grade 2 race won by United. And, it's interesting. This is a race that did it alter the state of racing? No, it did not. But it did have a really thrilling finish. It featured 5 graded stakes winning horses in the field, including the reigning John Henry Turf champion, United, a great horse. The other 4 graded stakes winners were Acclimate, Red King, Neptune Storm, and Award winner. And this was kind of the creme de la creme of the West Coast turf circuit and running against each other. And really, the race was a classic in terms of that final stretch run. Acclimate, as always, jumps out to that early lead, followed closely by Neptune's War. United, as he always does, sits back, bides his time, and as they turn for home, Acclimate looks like maybe he's got enough left in the tank to hold off all of the other challengers for a wire-to-wire victory. That's something we've seen actually more and more common in turf racing this fall in particular. We've seen a lot of wired turf races. I'm thinking of Beyond Brilliant in the Hollywood Derby and some of the races down at Gulfstream Park on the turf. You've seen horses wire the field. They're very strategic about holding out that pace and having plenty left to go coming for home. And so Acclimate looked like that, but all of a sudden you start to see United unfurl that long stride of his and start slowly but surely tracking down Acclimate. And then what was really exciting was the deep closer coming from all the way in the back in a really large field, about 14 horses, was Friars Road, kind of a long shot that nobody had much knowledge of, had just recently switched to a turf surface, and Friars Road comes charging up out of nowhere, and the 3 of them, Acclimate, Friars Road, and United, hit a photo 3-way finish for this grade 2 championship. Ultimately, United gets his head down just in the perfect bit of time, just perfectly timed, getting there, getting that head down, and United emerges as the winner. Acclimate second, Friars Road comes in third. And Friars Road has emerged as a really nice horse, not just a one-hit wonder, but a horse that really has turned in some very nice performances and hit the board in consecutive graded stakes races. So thrilling finish, strong field. That's why I have John Henry Turf Championship at number 10. At number 9, we're going to move to the East Coast and go to Aqueduct, and back in the springtime in the Wood Memorial, the grade 2 race won by Bourbonic. And this was a historic race. The Wood Memorial is, of course, a classic Kentucky Derby prep race and has, over the years, been a great indicator for future success. However, the inclusion of this year's race on the top 10 list is more for the thrilling finish in the historic long shot. It's interesting. You look at that Aqueduct Wood Memorial field, and you go back and look at that race. The horses like Risk Taking, Weyburn, Crowded Trade, and Prevalence were really among the favorites. But things did not necessarily go as planned on that day or after that day, really, for those horses. And we'll get to that in a bit. Interestingly enough, when you watch that race early on, you think this race is setting up quite nicely for the favorites as they're all behind the long shot Magic Mayhem. They're all behind this kind of early long shot speed, and they're all sitting kind of 2 through 5, 2 through 6, all in kind of a pretty good stalking position, which is where you'd like to be in a dirt race. And meanwhile, Bourbonic, 72-1 long shot, is at the very back of the field, maybe not quite as far back as Mind That Bird, but there's a big gap between him and everyone else. And as they turn for home, it's just really fascinating. The opening half mile was not particularly blistering, 50 seconds. So it's not as if the pace was just falling apart in front of Bourbonic. But as they turn for home, Market Mayhem, not Magic Mayhem, Market Maven starts to fade, and the leaders kind of take over. It looks like Dynamic One, who was another long shot, not as long as Bourbonic, but another long shot, or risk taking would get the victory. Weyburn starts to fade, and all of a sudden, coming out of the middle of the track, covered in dirt, looking just like he's run a million races because of how much dirt he's had kicked up in his face over the course of this race. Bourbonic comes blazing down the middle of the track in just a totally another gear, nabs Dynamic One at the wire, wins the Wood Memorial at 72-1, which is the biggest upset in the history of the Wood Memorial. So for that historic nature, certainly is, I think, worthy of that top 10 race of 2021. The euphoria of the victory is, like I said, one of the great moments of the year. Interestingly, though, this race did not have great legs. What I mean by that is Bourbonic really went on to be a one-hit wonder. Finished third at the Grade 3 West Virginia Derby, finished fifth at the Pennsylvania Derby, which was a Grade 1, but really has underperformed the rest of the three-year-old campaign. And the rest of the field, not really standing out either. Weyburn, who finished fourth at the Wood Memorial, probably is the best horse out of this field, but really lacks, a signature win in any way. Has put in some nice performances in graded and non-graded stakes races, but not one. And so, like I said, Bourbonic, historic long shot hitting the list. That's why he comes in at number 9. Well, coming in at number 8 was a sentimental favorite, I think, for a lot of horse racing fans, and that was the Grade 2 Jessamine Stakes at Keeneland, won by California Angel. And sometimes a race makes a list because of the impact the victory has on the sport, and that was certainly the case for the Jessamine Stakes. California Angel won this race in thrilling fashion, but this was really about the connections and the horse more than anything else. This was a field of juveniles going into that race at Keeneland. Overwhelming favorite, 4-5 favorite, Turner Loose. And really a lot of the horses behind Turner Loose were kind of more modestly single-digit priced horses. Horses like Diamond Wow, for instance, was I thought, a pretty good horse in that field. But ultimately, Turner Loose gets to the lead on this turf juvenile race and does a lot of what I just talked about with Acclimate. Kind of gets to the lead, slows the pace, controls the pace, kicks for home, and you think, all right, here's Turner Loose, going to pull away from the field, going to show a lot of class, overwhelming favorite, really get ready for that Breeders' Cup Philly Turf Juvenile. And all of a sudden, you see Diamond Wow start to creep up, and that you think is going to be the big competition, the big hard charger. And all of a sudden, in the last half furlong or so, California Angel, who's an 18-1 long shot, tracked everyone down in the middle of the track, middle of the turf course, ended up beating Diamond Wow by a nose and Turner Loose by about a neck, and it turned California Angel into a bit of a celebrity for a few different reasons. First, she's the progeny of Kentucky Derby and Preakness champion California Chrome. Everybody loves California Chrome. Everybody loves Chromie, as they like to call him. So he was a popular horse. His progeny are also very popular. California Angel, I should say, looks a lot like her sire. And so there was a lot of excitement over one of California Chrome's progeny winning that particular race. The other was, at the heart of the horse's story, was George Leonard II, her trainer, who is instantly recognizable at the track with his big Stetson and salt and pepper beard. And Leonard, who is a trainer of color, not only represents, I think, the right way to do things as a horse person. He really is kind of beyond repute and someone who is held in very high regard among the horse racing community as someone who does things the right way. But he also provides a lot of diversity in a sport that, quite frankly, lacks it oftentimes outside of the jockey's room. You look at a lot of ownership groups, you look at the prominent trainers, all white. And so it is, it's thrilling to see someone like Leonard, who came from very working class background, to rise up as a trainer and to have this horse win a Breeders' Cup, win in your in race with a California Chrome progeny. Really exciting. Got the public to really buy into Leonard II's life story, into California Angel's story. And listen, was this the best race of 2021? No. Will California Angel go on to distinguish her to a distinguished career? Maybe, maybe not. But the race is one on the list because it highlighted the great people in a sport at the time, quite frankly, when we really desperately needed it. And so this race really went above and beyond the track to something much higher. So let's transition to a race that was very much so because of what happened on the track. And this is number 7, the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, which was at Del Mar, which was won by Life is Good. And I think it would be easy to have a list of top 10 races really littered with Breeders' Cup races, because the Breeders' Cup this year did deliver us some really just amazing moments. We're going to talk about one more in particular on this list, but I didn't want the list just to be chock full of Breeders' Cup races, so I was very selective. And this is one that I chose, and it might seem like a curious choice, but in my eyes, this is a race that will live on for a little while longer and will have some good legs behind it, so to speak, because of what's going to happen in 2022 potentially. And I'll get to that in a second. But this was, of course, won, as I said, by Life is Good. And this was a race that features something I know I love and a lot of horse racing fans will love, which is fulfilled potential. It's so easy to get excited about potential. Just recently, we've been talking a lot about this with the horse flight line. But it's so great to see that potential fulfilled on the sport's biggest stage at the Breeders' Cup. And Life is Good did that. Life is Good's a horse that captured the imagination of racing fans in late 2020, early 2021, as he just dispatched the late Medina Spirit in a lot of those Triple Crown prep races, like the Grade 2 Sham and the Grade 3 Sham and the Grade 2 San Felipe Stakes. However, an injury derailed his run for the Triple Crown. Then you had all the controversy around Bob Baffert, and so he switched trainers to Todd Pletcher, went to Todd Pletcher's barn. Pletcher was very methodical in bringing the colt along, but ultimately ran him at the Grade 1 H. Allen Jerkins against, which was a sprint race. And Life is Good is probably more of a 2-turn horse, maybe a 1-turn mile horse, but probably more of a 2-turn horse. Ran him against the best 3-year-old sprint horse in the country in Jackie's Warrior, and almost won. Came in second, and that was off about a 6-month layoff. So it was an incredibly impressive first time back out. Then he follows that up by just obliterating the field at the Grade 2 Kelso handicap, and he showed up at Del Mar for the Breeders' Cup with everyone really waiting with bated breath to see, was he back? And he answered that definitively, and a big positive yes. It was a dominating route. Life is Good blew away his closest competition, who was Ginobili, who is not chopped liver. Ginobili is a Grade 2 winning 4-year-old colt, a very good horse in his own right, but won by 6 lengths and quite frankly was under an easy gallop the last half furlong. And the fractions he ran in that race were faster than the 2020 Dirt Mile champion Knicks Go. And that is why I think this race will live on for a while longer, because this race, and then obviously Knicks Go winning the Breeders' Cup Classic, set up what is already being anticipated as the biggest early year race in horse racing, which is the Pegasus World Cup in January at Gulfstream Park, in which Life is Good will take on the 2021 Breeders' Cup champion Knicks Go. That's exciting. But it was this race that propelled Life is Good into that race, into that conversation of, can Life is Good really now compete with the very, very best? And this was the effort that put him there. And so this is the effort that really set up that, I think, very exciting 2022 campaign for Life is Good, and one last challenge for Knicks Go at the Pegasus World Cup. So it gives us something to look forward to next year in this particular race. All right, well, let's move to number 6, and we're going to go overseas for number 6. And we're going to go to the Arc. That's right, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe in Longchamp, which was won by the long shot, 80-1 long shot to Quarter Tasso, a German horse. And I wanted to make sure that we have a couple of international races on this list, because while I do watch mostly North American racing, I do follow European and Asian races as well. They have some really great competition over there. Obviously, that goes without saying, but this was one of the thrilling races, and this is obviously one of the biggest races in all of Europe. And this is a little different than that Wood Memorial race in that, yes, Torquator Tasso is this 80-1 long shot. The difference is that this is a absolutely stacked field that he is running against. He is running against horses like Chronogenesis. He is running against horses like Adiyar, Hurricane Lane, Tarnawa, Aidan O'Brien's entry, Snowfall. I mean, this was a who's who of European racing in this race, trained by the best trainers on the continent, and was an incredibly impressive field. And it was a thrilling race on top of that. I remember watching this, waking up early, watching this race, and watching all of the races at Longchamp that day. And I remember when they broke, Chronogenesis, who's a champion Japanese horse, great horse, just recently retired actually. Chronogenesis ran so far outside and so far away from the rest of the horses that it reminded me of a car driving on an outlet road next to an interstate. You know, it was like they're going the same direction, but one is like way, way, way over here, and the other is, on the inside rail. Eventually, Chronogenesis gets kind of slowly, but eventually guided over to the kind of the other horses in the pack. But really, for the first, half mile or more, really far outside. So it was just really exciting to see that. Then you had champion jockey William Buick guiding the Godolphin bred, just a great horse in Adyar, to the front of the field. That also, like I said, featured the fellow Godolphin champion Hurricane Lane. You had a former Breeders' Cup champion Tarnawa in there as well. All of those horses were there. And then at the home stretch, when they hit the top, William Buick decides he's going to try to get a jump on the field and kind of sends Adyar first and tries to pull away from the rest of the field. And it almost works. Adyar pulls away, but all of a sudden you start to see Hurricane Lane and you start to see Tarnawa come up from the inside and gain ground and start catching up with Adyar. And I remember the gentleman who called the race said, Adyar is paddling now. He was really struggling those last couple of, that last half furlong or so, really trying to stay ahead, just couldn't quite do it. But then again, a theme of this year, coming from the middle of the track with the black cap and the red and yellow silks for Germany, comes Tarquator Tasso flying up from the outside and passing everyone and edging out Hurricane Lane and Tarnawa to win the ARC at a huge 80-1 price. Absolutely thrilling race, and really has set this 4-year-old German colt up for a big 2022. So this was one thrilling finish, amazing field, and one that I'm not going to forget anytime soon. So let's go to the second of our 2 European races on this top 10 list, and coming in at number 5 was the King George VI, Queen Elizabeth II Stakes, which took place, of course, at Royal Ascot and was won by the aforementioned Adyar. And, it's interesting. This is a race, typically I don't like to include small fields, races with small fields in the top 10. This was only a 5-horse field. A lot of times I don't like to do that because I just think it lacks the drama, quite frankly, and the spectacle of some other races. It's why, if you notice, we're a little light on West Coast dirt racing on this list because there's a lot of 4 and 5 horse fields out there. And it just doesn't lend itself to great races a lot of times. It could have a great performance, but not always great races. And this was quite the opposite. This was a small, but my gosh, star-studded field. You had Adyar, trained by Charlie Appleby. Then you had Aidan O'Brien's Love, who was coming off just really an incomparable 2020 campaign and coming off a win early in 2021 as well. Then you had John Gostin's Mischief, who a lot of people will claim is the best of this group in terms of just pound for pound as a horse. Just an amazing horse with a great turn of foot. And then rounding out the field, you had champion jockey Franco Dettori riding Lone Eagle. And then long shot Broom, who was 20-1 morning line. He was the other Aidan O'Brien entry. Just to give you a little sense of Broom, he ended up finishing second at the Breeders' Cup Turf in November. So the long shot in this race, the horse that was kind of an afterthought, he ended up coming in second at the Breeders' Cup. So that should tell you how stacked this field was. The field combined for 11 Group 1 or Grade 1 victories and 24 group and graded stakes victories between the 5 of them. Just an absolutely stacked field. And this was a race that lived up to the billing. Broom went out to the lead, got a little loose on the lead coming for home, got about 3 lengths ahead of Adyar, who was in second, and held on. But when William Buick and Adyar pushed the button, man, that was impressive. That was the first time I had really seen Adyar in live action. I had seen Adyar before in some video clips, but first time I had watched Adyar live, and wow, just what a motor and what a turn of foot this horse had. Meanwhile, Mischief, who was at the back of the pack, which in a 5-horse field doesn't mean much, but still comes flying up, kind of cuts off Love, quite frankly. And that was, it was everything was on the up and up. There was no kind of issues for DQs or anything like that, but really cut in front of Love as soon as he was clear of him. And so that was Love kind of had to redirect and lost a little momentum, I think, there coming down the home stretch. But it really came down to Mishriff and Adiyar, and the Godolphin colt was just too good. And Adiyar ends up winning and becoming the first horse since the legendary Galileo to win the Epsom Derby and the King George in the same year. And listen, anytime you make history at Royal Ascot, you're going to end up on a top 10 list. And for that reason, Adiyar and the King George VI Queen Elizabeth Stakes ends up at number 5 on my list. Well, now let's head to the top 4. And I think a lot of horse racing fans may have a good sense of where I'm going with most of these. And coming in at number 4 is the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, which just took place in November at Del Mar, won by Love's Only You. And this is another one about making history. And it was a thrilling race as well. Don't get me wrong. The race was amazing, but this was about history. And this is one where Love's Only You made history for an entire country, because going into the 2021 Breeders' Cup, no Japanese horse had ever won a Breeders' Cup race. They were 0 for 28. And additionally, even their best efforts rarely hit the board. I think you had 1 third place and 1 fourth place finish, but otherwise, most times they're well back in the pack, and there really were no competition for the North American and European horses that were running in this field. But Love's Only You, going into the Breeders' Cup, was clearly Japan's best chance at winning and doing well in the Breeders' Cup. Came in among the favorites, not the favorite, but among the favorites with a 4-1 morning line odds. But she had her work cut out for her. This was another really strong field. You had Love, the Aidan O'Brien horse I just talked about. You had Bill Mott's Warlike Goddess, who a 3-year-old who just looked like a world beater. Then you had Chad Brown and 2 of his horses, My Sister Nat and Pocket Square. And whenever Chad Brown horses are in a turf race, you got to take it seriously. So you had a lot of really strong competition here in this race. Love's Only You has run big races before. Won the Grade 1 Queen Elizabeth II Cup at Sha Tin in Hong Kong back in April. So this was not a horse that was going to shrink in a big moment. This was a horse that was used to a big stage, used to running against great competition, and it really showed. Early on in that race, going to Vegas dog tag, led the pace. Love's Only You, though, perfect stalking position, sitting about 4th, and it was really interesting. Great spot for Love's Only You. But all of a sudden, interestingly enough, going into that 3rd turn, Warlike Goddess makes this furious run from the back of the field and laps really the entire field because she was sitting really far back and ends up, like I said, making this huge run. Goes around everyone and coming for home. And you have to understand, in the turf course at Del Mar, the home stretch is not that long. So when they hit the home stretch, you don't have a lot of time to make up ground. And so Warlike Goddess gets to that lead at the top of the stretch, digs in, and you think, well, here comes Warlike Goddess. This is kind of it. And Warlike Goddess kind of pulls away a little bit, but then you see My Sister Nat, who had been sitting in about a 3rd position, really battle on. Love starts to fade a little bit after making a move. However, then you see Yuga Kawada, the jockey of Love's Only You, with a great move, just a great move. It splits the 2 other horses, splits My Sister Nat and Warlike Goddess, goes right between them and edges both of them out at the wire. It was a thrilling finish, and it took a second to sink in that, oh my God, this Japanese horse had finally broken the streak and that a Japanese horse had in fact won a Breeders' Cup championship. The post-race interview with Kawada with Donna Brothers was classic. The winner's circle was highly emotional with a lot of tears, a lot of excitement there from the Japanese contingent. And it really was an uplifting moment that ushered in a new player in the sport of kings. And the most amazing part about this race is that about an hour later, Japanese long shot Marche Lorraine captures the country's second Breeders' Cup championship when she won the Breeders' Cup Distaff, which was a thrilling finish as well. And that was one which just was a blistering pace in that race. And Marche Lorraine kind of cleaned the pieces on the back end, but it was just a huge day for Japan. But it all started with Love's Only You and the filly and mare turf. And I think this performance also is very symbolic of the rising influence of Japan in horse racing. I talked about it on the podcast. I've written about it over the fall. This fall and winter, you saw them purchase, and when I say them, I mean a lot of Japanese buyers, purchase several high-profile Kentucky broodmares for breeding. And you've seen North American champions like Frenzy Fire, who just retired, now go out to stud in Japan. So this was a coronation in some ways, or the culmination of a lot of years of hard work of building up horse racing in Japan. And now I think we're going to see a lot of major players coming out of that Japanese contingent. So let's move to the top three. And coming in at number 3 is the only Triple Crown race that is on the list, and that is the 2021 Belmont Stakes, won by Essential Quality. And this was a race that just thrilled me. And it featured historic speed and Essential Quality, who was a horse that looked like he could run for days. And this was a race that really turned into a match race between Essential Quality and Hot Rod Charlie, who were the two favorites. And it was, like I said, you had a great backdrop to this. Essential Quality had never lost a race, been pushed big time in the Bluegrass, which was an honorable mention race. It almost made it in, but had never lost a race, goes to Louisville for the Kentucky Derby 5 weeks before the Belmont, and comes in a disappointing 4th in that race, skips the Preakness, and then comes and is ready for the Belmont. And you have to remember, Essential Quality has that Tappet pedigree, and Tappet pedigree and Tappet progeny have won 4 of the last 8 Belmont Stakes. So you knew he had the rest and he had the pedigree to win this type of a race. And meanwhile, Hot Rod Charlie was a really fun horse, a gutsy horse, had a really fun young ownership group of a bunch of young college friends, came in a really game 3rd place behind Medina Spirit and Mandaloon at the Kentucky Derby, also skipped the Preakness, so you knew he was going to be ready, and for that 1.5 mile Test of Champions. Now, what was interesting was a speed duel broke out early on, and Hot Rod Charlie set the Belmont record for the fastest first opening 1/4 mile in the history of the race. He kept that pace up, extremely hot fractions at the 1/2 mile and 3/4 mile mark. So he was flying. And Rock Your World was pushing him a lot of the way. And you had Francisco de Ina as well, who kind of pushed in the beginning, who eventually started dropping out as a long shot. But those three really set a crazy hot pace for the Belmont in particular, a race where you'd expect you'd want to save your horse, even if you were up on the lead. Well, this sets up perfectly for Essential Quality, who can run into some speed and can just start to really unfurl that long stride of his. And you start to see that coming around the 3rd and 4th turn, that Essential Quality starts to move up, starts picking off people, and comes right up to Hot Rod Charlie. They turn for home, and you think Essential Quality is going to pull away, but you never watched a race with Hot Rod Charlie if you thought that, because Hot Rod Charlie, for all of his warts sometimes, for all the hold all tickets jokes that people make about him always being in controversial finishes, that horse digs in and he fights. And that's exactly what happened. It was a thrilling stretch run with the two of them just pulling away from everyone else. And they were so much the best on that particular day. It was just a really amazing performance. And eventually, as he always tends to do, Essential Quality just wears down Hot Rod Charlie, and that pedigree comes to the top and ends up winning the Grade 1 Belmont Stakes for the 3rd jewel in the Triple Crown. Listen, I love that race. I think you could make an argument that maybe the Bluegrass was a more exciting race. You could make an argument even that the Travers, Essential Quality's race against Midnight Bourbon, maybe was more thrilling. But I thought his performance on one of the biggest stages in the sport with the nation watching was incredibly impressive. You always, I think, have to weight those Triple Crown races a little bit more because of the impact they have in the broader culture of horse racing and sports in general. And additionally, I'm on the record for saying that I thought the best second place performance I saw all year was Hot Rod Charlie in that race. So that was the best second place performance. And for me, the third best race of 2021. Okay, well, now we're in the top two. And I hope people know where I'm going with these top two. But coming in at number two, the Forgo Stakes at Saratoga, won by Yalpin. But Yalpin may not have been the story from that. And of course, that is a race that is defined by the stretch run between Yalpin and Firenze Fire, where Firenze Fire tries to savage, and it doesn't just try, savages Yalpin down the stretch as they race going for the finish line. And it was just an unbelievable race. And it was a race that left everybody's jaw on the floor. The image of Firenze Fire savaging Yalpin is maybe the most indelible image of 2021 in horse racing. It was just an incredible thing to witness in real time. It was an incredible spectacle to see. The announcers calling the race were just gobsmacked. You could tell they had never seen anything like this before. It is uncommon for a horse to try to savage another horse while racing. It is unheard of for a horse to try to repeatedly savage another horse while racing down the stretch. And that's exactly what we had. But I think if you just talk about Firenze Fire and Yalpin, you really do lose a little something in understanding this race. This was a loaded field. This was a great field of horses. You had Whitmore, the old man. You had Lexitonian, the always just, a horse that turns in the most befuddling performances, but is capable of winning any race when he's at his best. You had Mischievous Alex, and then you had Firenze Fire and Yalpin. Those 5 horses alone combined for 23 graded stakes victories at the time of the running of the Forgo. And in many ways, they represented the past, the present, and the potential future of the dirt sprint division. Of course, the race played out with Yalpin getting to that early lead, Firenze Fire sitting off his backside, sitting off of him in that second position. Whitmore and Mischievous Alex a little further back. Ultimately, this ended up being Whitmore's final race, retiring after this. He was a great champion, but obviously just not quite up to the cut necessary in the sprint division anymore. And as they turned for home, Firenze Fire kind of drew up pretty even to Yalpin. And I remember watching the race in real time, and when they crossed the 8th of a mile marker, Firenze Fire kind of made a motion with his head to the left, or to the left, because he was to the outside of Yalpin. Made a motion to the left, but it was kind of indistinguishable. But you could tell Jose Ortiz, the jockey of Firenze Fire, noticed something because he kind of got him straightened out. And then about 5 strides later, Firenze Fire was like, forget this. I'm going after this horse. And just proceeded to savage Yalpin over a series of about 4 or 5 strides. Jose Ortiz had his reins very loose, and it took him a lot of time to collect his reins and get Firenze Fire off of Yalpin, who Yalpin, God bless him, just continued to run unbothered through all this with his jockey, Ricardo Santana Jr. And the amazing thing is that savaging Yalpin probably cost Firenze Fire the race because he was catching up and potentially passing Yalpin, then savages him, loses ground. Ortiz gets him back out from there, and then he makes up more ground on Yalpin and nearly tracks him down at the finish line. So it was just an absolutely jaw-dropping race to watch in real time. Like I said, the image of Firenze Fire savaging Yalpin is going to be one that outlives all of us, I have a feeling, and is going to be one of those images that's memorialized at Saratoga and in horse racing. One of the other images that always made me smile was as they cross the finish line, Ricardo Santana Jr. reaches over and kind of pats Jose Ortiz on the arm. You can tell him he's trying to let him know it's okay. You're all right. I'm all right. You're all right. Everybody's okay. It's okay. And Ricardo Santana Jr. has this huge grin on his face. Obviously, he's thrilled. He just won a Grade 1 race. But I can't help but think he just also realizes just the ridiculousness of what he's just been through. Whereas Jose Ortiz has this very earnest look in his face where you could tell he's profusely apologizing to Ricardo Santana Jr. But that was also an image that just always made me smile. The two jockeys with very different reactions after that instance. The only sad part about this was that Yalpin had an injury after the race and was forced into retirement. And Firenze Fire only ran 2 more races and is retiring and is now, as I mentioned, is out to stud in Japan. So, you didn't see much more of this you didn't see any more, unfortunately, of this feud between the two horses. And of course, the irony that a lot of people pointed out was that the Frenzy Fire had been on the other end of a savaging attack at Parks Racetrack earlier in his career. But this performance, like I said, will go on and outlive all of us. And coming in at number one on my list of the best horse races of 2021 is the Apple Blossom Stakes. And this was the Grade 1 race at Oak Lawn Park, won by Latruska. And this was a horse that everyone was talking about throughout the year. And this was a race that was a passing of the guard. This was a race that announced a new horse on the scene, and Latruska used this race as a springboard to a truly miraculous 2021 campaign. And this was a race with three amazing horses in it, looking back on it now. You had Latruska, you had Monomoy Girl, and you had Swiss Skydiver. Swiss Skydiver, a legendary cult status of a horse. Obviously, this was the horse in 2020 that took on the boys at the Preakness and won, and evoked the comparisons to the great super filly Rachel Alexandra, who had done so 11 years earlier. And it wasn't just a one-time fluke with Swiss Skydiver. She had gone up against the boys earlier at the Bluegrass Stakes in 2020 and just lost out to Art Collector in that race. And so just an incredible horse. And even prior to the 2021 Apple Blossom, she had already racked up another Grade 1 victory at the Beholder Stakes at Santa Anita earlier that spring. Then you had Monomoy Girl, a legend, just a legend. 2 Breeders' Cup Distaff Championships, 7 Grade 1 victories, and amazingly, out of 16 career races, 14 career victories, and had never finished worse than second in the other 2 races. So this was just the absolute best of the best. And then you had Latruska, who came into the race as somewhat of an unknown. I know that might seem amazing now, but Latruska really had a solid, but not a spectacular 2020 campaign. You have to understand, Latruska is a horse that started out her career in Mexico, comes up to the United States, wins a few Grade 3 victories, but in 2020 had stepped up to a Grade 2 and a Grade 1 on a couple of occasions and finished well back and was well beaten in those races. And now all of a sudden goes to a Grade 1 against the legendary Monomoy Girl, against the historic Swiss Skydiver. And you think, well, what can Latruska possibly do? Right from the early get-go, it was obvious Latruska was special, though, in this race. Even the track announcer, when they broke, said, Swiss Skydiver has been asked for early speed. Latruska has been asked for none, but goes to the lead. And that tells you everything you need to know. Irad Ortiz Jr., who was riding Latruska, did not push that horse out of the starting gate. Latruska just had natural speed that was so good, it got to the lead above horses that were trying to hustle to the lead. And not just horses, great horses that were trying to hustle to the lead. So Latruska gets on the lead, goes all the way around, and the top 3 of Latruska, Swiss Skydiver, and Monomoy Girl separate themselves by about 10, 12 lengths from everybody else in the race. So it's really a 3-horse race. They're coming for home. Swiss Skydiver starts to drop out, and Monomoy Girl moves up and makes her move and draws even ahead of Latruska. And listen, when you watch enough horse racing, when that happens, 99 times out of 100, it's over. When the horse that has been tracking the pace setter makes a move and gets ahead, the pace setter fades and the horse that had been in stalking position pulls away. But those races that typically have that happen don't include Latruska. Latruska, under a strong ride from Irad Ortiz Jr., really dug in, showed the heart of a champion, fought back, and actually got the lead back from Monomoy Girl, and the 2 of them just are trading the lead with every single stride. Their heads are bobbing up and down, one ahead of the other every other time. It was absolutely amazing to watch these 2 great horses go up against each other, but ultimately, it is Latruska that barely edges out Monomoy Girl by a nose at the wire. Thrilling race. And it also meant a lot for the sport because it ended up being the final race for Monomoy Girl's career. Ends up, like I said, winning 14 of her 17 career races. And it also propelled Latruska to new heights. She won that Grade 1. Then she went on to win 3 more Grade 1s and a Grade 2 over the summer at Saratoga. and New York and at Churchill, I believe, and just looked dominant in those with that same front running style, catch me if you can, and had a lot of people talking, was she going to be potentially the horse of the year, even though she'd never run against the boys, because she was that good against that varied of competition. She ran a lot. She ran often. She ran against all comers, and she gained a lot of respect, I think, from a lot of people. And unfortunately, the fairy tale story did not end the way a lot of fans of Latruska had hoped, as she got caught up in just an insane speed duel at the Breeders' Cup Distaff and finished a distant 10th. But that Apple Blossom Stakes was the race that catapulted Latruska onto the national scene and gave the sport a new champion to love. So that is my top 10. And man, as soon as I got done, coming up with this list, I thought to myself, I feel like I could have included 10 other races on this list and been totally justified. There are so many great races. So let me know what you think was omitted from this list. What would you have included? What was too high? What was too low? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Tweet at me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Well, folks, that's going to do it for today. I thank you for your time, and just a reminder to make sure to follow, download, rate, review, and share the Win Place Show on the podcast platform of your choice. Subscribe to the Win Place Show on YouTube, and you can find that linked in the episode notes if you're listening to the podcast. And also make sure to head over to amalfimedia.com to get all the horse racing content you need for the 2022 run for the Triple Crown. For those of you who may not have ever, seen my videos or listened to my podcast before, listen, we have weekly race recaps. We have weekly horse racing news. We have weekly graded stakes previews as well for tracks across the country. Coming up, going to be previewing the New Year's Day races at Santa Anita. And so we have something for every type of horse racing fan. And we can't wait to have you join the Win Place Show in 2022. Well, friends, until next time, I'm Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.